Everybody doing all right? Yeah? Had a good first day? My name's Scott. I live in Nashville with my wife and two children. I work at Stratasyn. We're about 22, give or take. And we build healthcare applications. And a lot of the context that I kind of talk about is from my experience there. Really good people, and it's been a really fun ride. On Twitter, I'm Scott S. Burns, and on GitHub, I'm S. Burns. I was a little late to the Twitter here, so I didn't get the handle out of it. Show of hands, who here has built a website or a web app or something like that that they have, somewhere that they want people to use, kind of, generally. A lot of hands. If you didn't raise your hand, go to Tracy's talk later today and buy her book so you can build a Django app. It's awesome. So let's get into the story. Co-founder runs into your office, says, "Hey man, we are about to launch a demo and the app is down." Fire and brimstone, right? Like business people, they always get worked up about things. But you say, like, no. You're the calm, cool, collected engineer. Actually, we've got robots. And like robots make sure the site's up. And robots like chat to us when the site's down. And blah blah blah, like microservices, containers, cloud. Our app can't fall down. So the co-founder, rightly gets upset at you, pushes you away from your computer, and pulls up your site. So Nginx is a web server, and this is basically like the hello world of your web server. If you can install it, and Nginx is easy to install, it's fast, it's performant, but the devil is in the details. And if you don't sort of configure everything right, you can easily wind up with a page like this, which is, what you don't want your customers to see. But this is like an actual web pipe. This is an actual web page, right? So your robots, said they were looking for a website, and there's a website, something responds. So technically, it wasn't down. The robots never said anything. So both people were right. Like the app is down, but the robots were right. So who's right in this situation? Well, we're not going to talk about Website Monitor. That's a fun talk. I'm not giving it. What I want to talk about is basically like why did your partner get mad at you when your site was obviously up when it wasn't really up? How could you have handled that situation better? How can we relate to our coworkers and our other developers in a way that really makes our organization successful? And how can empathy kind of drive these improvements in our relationships? Developing software is really emotional, and we like to think that it's just logical, like I gotta put this piece over there and that piece over there and make it all just work. But we also like to argue about software a lot because we like to argue about our text editors, our operating systems, our white space. You can find any there are infinite threads on these battles on the internet. And believe it or not, if you write a Python application in Vim on OS 10 using spaces, it's not going to be any more successful or fast or maintainable if you write it on Emacs, on Linux with tabs. These things, and I'm not even talking about languages or frameworks or anything. These things we make emotional decisions about the tools we use, the things we build. So not all of software is purely logical. So as we become experienced developers, we settle into decisions about how we're going to build things, what tools we're going to use, and this kind of drives the context through which we see the world. What does that look like? And I'm not going to get into how we make decisions. That's pretty hard. But typically speaking, there's some input from the world. And this is super, super basic overview. That input coming into us, we make some decision, I don't trust that blog post, or I know this person in real life, I like what they have to say about, whatever. And maybe drive some action that we do. I read this blog post, I kind of internalize what they do. The next feature for our product, we're going to kind of go that way. The fun part is that every action that we take, sort of externally, drives inputs to other people. And so this like feedback loop is really life, and kind of how we live. We get input, make a decision that hopefully helps us, survive better, and we take some action based on it. I can't really control, what's going to come into your world. That's pretty hard. I can't really even control what decisions you make. But what I want to focus on is the actions you take. Like what do you put into the world to hopefully make this a better place. So that being said, like how do we serve our coworkers? We're developers. How can we kind of empathize with our coworkers to improve our our organization? I said it. Engineering is not the most important part of the team. Engineering is not the most important part of the team. And if you can't if I lose you here, nothing else I say is going to matter. But no part of the team is the most important part. And I know, like we read on Hacker News, like every morning, like you got to find like those 10x engineers, and because if you don't, like you're never going to like hit $20 billion valuation, like, and then if you don't do that, like what's your life going to mean? But as developers, we say like, no, we are like, I'm a ninja snowflake, I'm unique, like you guys like can't be successful without me. And I'm not saying we're not all unique here. We are, for better or for worse. But maybe what's less important for our coworkers is that we just show up and we do work and we put in sweat and we learn from each other. And maybe it's less so, that we have this like mindset of like how talented we are. But then if it's not how unique your engineering team is, then like what does matter? Like trying to flip everybody on their head. But let's just consider like a world in which the business that we're in. What if they don't have constituent teams? So, okay, without engineering, then we just kind of have ideas. Typically, as engineers, the fun part of our job is to take ideas from product and turn them into actual things that people can do. But without marketing, it's kind of hard to see. That's somebody going to sleep. Like without marketing, nobody knows about your thing. Nobody knows that like what pain it's going to solve, and they might just like disregard it. Without support, everybody's unhappy because developers doing support can be a nightmare. And support people are usually really good about kind of understanding the customer's problem. But if there's no support, then those users are just going to tell other people, like, yeah, don't try that app. Like, it's just pain, it's tears, and that's bad. But without sales, ultimately, I don't have a job. Like, sales makes money, and money is a big reason we go to our jobs every day. It's not the only reason, but it does keep us coming back. So without sales, like, there's not a business. Successful businesses, organizations, solve the puzzle of putting all these pieces together. And it's a really hard puzzle because you can't assemble all the pieces at once. You can't just open the box and here's all your pieces. People are expensive. You kind of have to like start slowly. But there's not even a box to like look at for the whole design. Like nobody knows what your business looks like when all is said and done. And the pieces continually change. Like people leave, people come in. How do we keep all those pieces running together to make like valuable change for the organization? And then sometimes we pivot and we start playing with Legos, and my analogy just went really strange. So, what as developers, like, how can we help the other groups of our business? How can we empathize with our colleagues? Well, with sales and developers, they're like jets and sharks. Like they're just different people, and that's okay because they do some things that I could never do. I could never be like sort of I could never call somebody and be kind of just hung up on a daily basis, in and out. Like I would just, I'd be so unhappy. But to do their job, they need to know like what the app does, or product or whatever, and what it doesn't do. And so they can positively speak about both like the features and the non-features that you decided you're not, tackling. How these features really set your product apart from the competition is their livelihood. That's how they talk to people. So when you work for a week on some visible change, and you fix some architecture bugs, don't be discouraged when sales people's eyes glaze over, because that is really hard to talk to customers about, and that's okay. What's exciting for development is not always exciting for sales. And this is perfectly normal. But do get excited when you do have like a user-facing feature that they eat up, because you're both kind of on the same wavelength at that point, and you can like really sort of understand what they get excited about. But don't be bummed when they don't care what you did for a week. What does marketing do? That's a great question. But really, marketing, I think, wants to build like a really concise story about why your customers need this product. Developers, and myself included sometimes, it's easy to give marketing a bad rap, because it like necessarily, to build a concise story, it necessarily filters out like the most interesting bits of development, and that's okay. But how they need to build a story that they can quickly tell people, like, what value does the product provide? What pain does it alleviate? And hopefully a lot of your work as developers, is always sort of geared toward reducing pain for customers, or increasing value. But if you think your product is wrongly marketed, you have to like take it on yourself to say so. But you have to remember that customers aren't like buying your code to like experience this magical code. They're not buying your product to experience this magical code like from the heavens that you wrote. Like they're buying this product. They're buying into what you do to your company because they have problems they need to solve. They have they have a choice. Could they do this on their own, or can you do it more efficiently? Marketing. Their whole goal is to say, we'll do it more efficiently. We'll do it cheaper than you can do it. So that's marketing. Who's ever taken like a support rotation or handled like support issues? The real world is different than your test suite. Bad things happen. People get confused, and when you actually have a human working with your application, they can get to like states that you never even thought possible, because you're this logical developer. Like, why did this ever happen? Like, there's no way they could submit a form with an empty input or something like that. So support gets a very biased view of the product, because they see all the bad parts. They see like the heavily used parts that people have trouble with. They see the less heavily used parts that one person thought would work well, and it doesn't. Support typically wants to know like why is the product. Why do we decide the product would do such and such in a particular way? Maybe that was a product development or product management decision. Maybe it's a little bit of development, but clearly, if X is not doing something the way customers are wanting to, there's a little mismatch there. And they also, better than they know when the product doesn't really conform to what users expect. Now maybe users expect something that you're not ready to give them, but that's something that we have to like internalize as developers. Like they are on the front lines. They know every skeleton in the code base, maybe better than you do, because people that have paid your organization to actually use this product are getting issues. And that's not fun. Pointy-haired bosses. Management, like marketing, I think, gets the short shaft sometimes. Because bad management just sticks out like a sore thumb. Good management is much harder to kind of recognize because good managers just tend to disappear into the team, and they have this like invisible hand that just makes the team go in the right way. So as developers, we often bristle at questions that are like, when is feature X going to be done? Why aren't we on feature Y yet? Have you fixed bug Z? And we have this like intimate knowledge of why we haven't done that. Because, we found that the library was outdated, blah, 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 blah. So many reasons why things get pushed back from a development perspective. But they're asking these questions because the rest of the organization cannot just instantly react when a feature is completed or a bug is fixed. Support can't instantly know that we just deployed and users should not expect to see this error anymore. Marketing can't instantly come up with slicks for why this new feature is gonna revolutionize the world, and sales can't come up with like a new story. So management is asking these questions because they have to get the rest of the organization in line for whatever you're doing. All the pieces of the puzzle need to be spinning at the same rate in the same direction. Ultimately, what management is doing is trying to make sure that your work is delivering value, and they're doing that across the organization. With sales, though, it's really easy because salespeople get a contract signed, and somewhere in there there's a dollar sign with a number next to it. That's easy to quantify, like numbers. But we don't have numbers in development. We can't say that a deleted line of code is any less or more valuable than 10 added lines. We don't know how to do that. So I think once somebody can figure out that, and it's a really, really hard problem, I think we will have a better understanding of what management's trying to accomplish with respect to developers. But you have to always remember that management just needs to make sure that everybody is delivering value and everybody knows what's everybody doing, and that everybody's doing what everybody thinks that everybody else is doing, which is really hard. And so if you ever do find yourself working for a good manager, be happy, because there are a lot of bad managers, and it's a very difficult skill. Moving a little bit, how do we serve other developers? First thing I would say is let's try to write empathetic code, my definition is empathetic code is written in the consideration of others. It's written from a different perspective than your own self. So what are kind of like empathetic patterns? Test-driven development. Test-driven development necessarily forces you to write the other side of the code. Like, who is going to use this code? For right now, it's the test suite. But the idea is the rest of your application will use this code at some point. So that makes you think what should the code look like? What's the API? What arguments is it expecting? What are you going to return back? It forces you to make decisions about how things should work beforehand. It forces you to be a user before you're the implementer. High test coverage. Believe it or not, all code at some point is going to be rewritten. No code is ever perfect. Requirements change all the time. And so when it comes time to refactor, whether it's you in 6 months or your coworkers next week, high test coverage helps you be confident that the changes you do to a particular module aren't going to have sort of far-reaching, understood or misunderstood effects throughout your code base. And that's that is what matters especially when we write tests. We need to sort of, so that other people beyond yourself and or yourself later, because that's like a totally different person 6 months from now. Be confident that you can like interact with your code base and change things, and you're not going to break everything. Finally, documentation. Great keynote. Documentation has to be correct, because you can finish writing a module and it's the most elegant piece of code ever. But if you tell somebody how to use it incorrectly, it negatively impacts everybody else. I think documentation should also be succinct. I think the length of your documentation should be related to like the complexity of your code, because nobody wants to get into reading like a War and Peace tome about this like 4-line function that you wrote. Write about your code to the extent that related to the amount of things it does. Because as developers, we want to get into documentation, figure out some kind of argument or flag that we need to pass, and get back out and get back to our work. Who here is involved in open source? Anybody? Keep them raised if you want. Who here depends on open source projects for their work or hobby? That's like literally all hands. You can't even like boot modern computers without open source work, Perl or Python or things like that. Open source developers tend to not be paid for their work. There are some people in really awesome gigs that can have X amount of time to contribute to open source. That's awesome, but most of the time open source developers are kind of doing this out of the benevolence of their heart. But that doesn't mean open source isn't valuable. It also means that issues are going to come up as you use open source tools. And if you're a good developer, you want to figure out, why a particular module or third party is not working, and maybe you let the developer know, like, hey, I followed your documentation, but when I did this happened. Unless you have a relationship with that person already, this could be that person's like first contribution to open source. Like, somebody just taught them Git and how to publish something on GitHub, and you found it and you used it, and it didn't work quite right. So be kind when you raise issues. Unless you were sitting next to them when they wrote it, you don't really know much about like kind of the context with which they wrote this this code. So be kind when you interact. When you respond to issues in your open source projects, be kind, because it could be this person's first interaction. Like they could be a beginner developer, and they could if you're not kind, they could have a sour taste from like day one about that just everybody on open source is mean, and that's not true. And generally be kind. Code reviews. I think code reviews are where developers like grow. But it requires good reviewers, because bad reviewers are going to make any kind of code review be a bad experience. Code reviews can be an opportunity to learn something new or improve internal processes. You got to remember, we review the code, we don't review the person. The person could have had a bad day or a good day or whatever. You weren't there when they wrote it. So you got to review the code and not the person. But it gives you a chance to kind of get into their thinking process. Why did they do something in a particular way? If it's not the way you would have done it, which is okay maybe, did they just maybe, is there a lack of knowledge? Oh, you could use this function in JBazar instead of doing that. That could be a good teaching moment. I actually recently started trying to peer review. So pair coding is let's work together on this problem, bounce ideas back and forth. I think peer reviewing can be equally as a positive experience because you can get like right into the change set. You can get into the diff and say like, okay, yep, that's what I would do. Oh, I would do it, but maybe slightly different. Oh, I like how you did it. Like asynchronous communication, like on pull requests and stuff like that. It's good, but it's also really slow, and it doesn't have that much bandwidth, so to speak. But if you can, if you can take time and sit down to and review this code together, I think you can really get into the mindset of the developer that wrote the PR and use it as a growing opportunity. Development gets a lot of press these days. We are really lucky that we've all kind of found a skill set that the market is willing to pay for. And it can be a really prosperous career for a lot of people. There's an ever-growing need. Quote-unquote, software is eating the world, right? But that means that this demands a lot of developers, and probably more developers than the standard education system is providing. This means that a lot of people come from disparate backgrounds. There's a lot of 4-year CS degrees out there. That's great. I wish I knew when I was going through university that I was less of an engineer and more of a developer, but I didn't. And it's been 6 years studying something that I don't do anymore. People can graduate from college with other degrees other than CS. It's a thing. And they're worthwhile degrees. But sometimes people want to come and learn development. There's a lot of software schools these days. And some people are just self-taught. They're so motivated that they take online classes, buy a lot of books. So we should never, ever speak to other developers based on their background, because that necessarily leads us into a bias about like what they may or may not know. Because many CS degrees, students come out of university and can write like a brilliant merge sort algorithm, but they have no idea how to use Git. And plenty of people come out of software school like ready to contribute in like invaluable ways, but maybe they've never heard of like balanced binary tree or something like that. Like that's okay. There's always going to be differences in how we learned our craft, and that's all right. But don't talk to one another based on where they came from. Abilities, skill levels. Adrian, in her wonderful keynote yesterday, said, obviously we all start as beginners. Nobody comes out of the womb ready to like write Django app. So we start as beginners, and maybe we go through university, we take a software school, and we're juniors. Something happens. Somebody takes a chance on us and gives us a job as a junior developer. And for the next couple of years, something happens. But one day, we walk into work, and we are magically promoted to senior developer. Congratulations. That doesn't instantly make you any better than you were yesterday. Because obviously, if your boss said that you should be promoted, then you've clearly been doing senior-like work for a while. You don't just wake up and be a senior. This isn't like, so ability is a very clear continuum. And there's always somebody to the left and to the right. Like, I'm terrible at networking. I don't know networking. I can do other things, but I'm not good at networking, and I know that. And so, senior people can be very junior at things, and vice versa. So don't talk down, or don't talk up to people that you know are way more experienced or way less experienced. They're just as valuable contributors because they have just such a different context with which they approach problems. So get out of your head. Like, approach problems from a different perspective, because we all have different contexts. We all have sort of come to this place where we are through different paths. And your path was just one possibility out of 7 billion. So your context with which you approach problems is not right, is not wrong, it's just who you are. Fix problems. Fix problems for your coworkers, fix problems for your developers. But fix problems, with the perspective that you want to help people. Don't just help yourself all the time. Don't bury your head in the sand and just fix things that you feel should be fixed. Because oftentimes that can make new problems. Increase happiness all the time. Love one another. Make friends. Be happy. Thank you.